Part 3, 3D, by Michael Avallone. Chapter 8. The Monster is Loose. Rushing winds and eerie night sounds had encompassed the cottage as Derek and Chris made their way back. The brilliant full moon had now been overtaken by dark and somber clouds. The entire landscape was one of abandonment and isolation, as if no living soul was present at Crystal Lake. A windstorm seemed to be brewing also, making the entire vicinity and its environs one of forlorn desolation. Not a light was showing from the old house, not so much as a candle's glow. As they walked up the winding dirt road past the lake, Chris was holding Derek tightly around the waist. She needed the comfort of his presence. A chill had stolen over her, aided and abetted by the encounter with weird old Abel. The ancient bum was not exactly a heartwarming individual. He had given her the galloping creeps. Added to her bad memories of the cottage, her mood was very low. The howling wind building up in fury worsened that. There was no sign of life from the house as they drew closer. None at all. That somehow did not seem right. "It's awfully quiet around here," Chris offered. "Hard to believe the Wild Bunch is already asleep." "Knowing them," Derek added cynically, "who knows what's waiting for us inside?" They reached the kitchen door. Derek trained the flashlight on the knob. Chris, leading him, turned the handle and pushed the door inward. The barrier opened a crack, then came to an abrupt stop. Something heavy seemed to be pressing against the other side. Chris frowned. "There's something behind the door. I can't open it." Then she sniffed the air, her nose wrinkling. "I smell something burning." Derek grunted. "Let Mr. Macho have a crack at it." Leading with his shoulder, he rammed against the stubborn door. Forcing it ajar even more, he slipped inside. Chris followed. The kitchen was as dark as a tomb. Derek slid a hand along the wall, searching for the light switch. "Something is burning." "Chris, look at the stove!" She aimed the flashlight at the stove. A pot was cooking there, charring over a little burner. Derek found the switch, but nothing happened. The light's not working." "What the—" Chris turned off the gas burner, grabbed a towel, and lifted the too-hot lid. The flash revealed burning, blackened popcorn. "Real smart," she growled. "What a bunch of yo-yos." Derek had bumped into the butcher block table in the dark as he went around it to close the door. The table was situated on a woven circular rug, which was wedged underneath the doorframe. "Look at this," he advised Chris. She shone the light in his direction. Derek dislodged the rug. "Somebody shoved this against the door. That's why we couldn't open the damn thing." "What's going on here, Derek?" It was all so confusing. "You tell me. They're your friends." He crossed over to the living room. "I'm going to check the big room." He passed through the swinging door that separated kitchen and living room. Chris laid the flashlight down on the butcher block table. With the towel, she carried the smoking charred pot to the sink. She ran the faucet and the pot sizzled as the liquid hit its overheated surfaces. She tried to not be frightened or upset, but it was not easy. With the howling wind, the darkness, the electricity out, and no sign of Chuck, Chili, Debbie, Andy, Vera, or Shelley, she was very disturbed. It wasn't right that things should be so quiet. Derek, being in the living room and not with her, was also a bit unsettling. She did not want to be alone, not even for a second. Derek, using the glowing fireplace as a guide, looked around the big room. The flickering orange glow from the low-burning fire aided him as he traversed the room, trying each light switch to no avail. The juice seemed to be dead. Derek began to feel uneasy, too. "Andy," he sang out. "Debbie? Vera? Shelley? Where is everybody? Chuck! Chili! Come on, you guys!" There was no answer and no light, except for a dimly lit kerosene lamp tipped over in one corner of the room. Everything else appeared virtually untouched, innocent of any kind of previous intrusion. Derek sent the lantern upright and returned to the kitchen. A log in the fireplace crackled and split as it yielded to the flames. "No dice," he said, sticking his head into the kitchen. "Huh?" Chris almost jumped when he bobbed back in. "It appears that everyone else has taken off and left us." "They wouldn't do that." She was scraping the burned pot in the sink. Derek wagged his handsome head. "Well, I don't know what they're up to, but the electricity is out in the house. I'm going to the barn to check the main circuits. You stay here." He swung the door shut and Chris dropped the charred pot. "Derek, wait for me! I want to go with you!" She retrieved the flashlight and rushed after him, catching up with him in the living room. He grinned and took her hand, squeezing it for comfort. But then he was gone just like that. She lost sight of him when she dropped the flashlight. When she straightened up, he was nowhere to be seen. The furniture seemed to mock her. "Derek?" She heard a slam of a sound and trained the flashlight in that direction. The front door to the house was standing open, victim of the budding storm. She hurried toward the swinging barrier but hesitated before going through it. Her heart was somewhere in her mouth. "Derek, is everything all right?" Standing framed in the doorway of the house, she could not see to her left. There, just off the porch, Derek was wrapped in the bulky, cruel arms of a shadowy giant. One mammoth hand covered Derek's mouth, preventing any outcry. Derek's arms clawed straight outward, pleading for help. But the arms of Jason were merciless. His mad eyes shone like fiery coals in the gloom of the porch. The silent struggle continued. Derek's eyes were popping out of his head. Chris, deciding not to go outside in the dark night, went back inside, closing the door against the wind. Derek's last remaining hope for survival was gone. Jason proceeded to crush his skull with his bare hands. Derek's eyes bugged out of their sockets. His feet tattooed helplessly against the porch floorboards. But only Jason heard that. Jason in the night. Chris was back in the house, alone with the rest of the dead. Back inside the darkened cottage once more, Chris was about to re-enter the kitchen when the sound of water dripping in a steady rhythmic cadence made her stop dead in her tracks. She shone the flashlight upwards in the direction of the noise. She gawked foolishly, her brain trying to gather the loose ends of all that was happening now, so very quickly. The balcony above her was rimmed with water. A continuing flow of droplets was cascading down, splashing on the living room floor. Disturbed anew, she moved to the base of the spiral staircase. The shadows of the interior made flickering phantoms in the gloom. "I don't know what kind of game you guys are playing," she called up the winding staircase, "but I don't like it." She climbed quickly, the flashlight beam preceding her, a moving, stabbing beacon of light. The glare picked up the path of the flowing water. It was like a stream, really, stopping at the bottom of the closed bedroom door. Chris had no way of knowing that the liquid path went as far as the bathroom door. The water seeped. Chris sloshed through the puddles. "Hey guys, enough is enough. You're wrecking the house, and that isn't fair." Andy and Debbie's bedroom was worse. She tracked in, disgustedly, anger replacing the uneasiness she had experienced earlier. She almost broke through the bathroom door toward the tub and the shower curtain. The running water was a Niagara of noise now, closer to its source. Chris aimed the flashlight, tearing the curtain to one side. The light beam illuminated the overflowing tub. Various clothes floated on the surface. There were very curious stains on the material, red like blood. Chris lifted the wet clothing from the basin. It was then that she realized the red was blood, that the garments were blood-stained. "What is going on here?" Her shocked voice questioned the four walls, and then she ran almost blindly out of the bathroom, out of the bedroom, flying down the spiral staircase, her shoes barely touching the steps on the way down. Her brain refused to think, to add all the twos and twos the last few terrible minutes had presented to her. She hurtled for the front door and the safety of outside. She whipped the door open. Behind her, the water still gurgled in its steady running, cascading from the overfilled balcony. Leaving the door hanging wide open, she plunged into the night and the darkness, running for the red barn, standing off to the right, almost racing the wind. The blowing wind tossed her blonde hair wildly. "Derek!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Stumbling on the dark path, she grabbed at overhanging oaken branches to keep herself from falling. The wind whistled through the trees in a wailing symphony of fear, and something swung down, hitting her full force in the face, knocking her backwards for a moment. A dangling, rotating, wrapped-up thing, descending from the gnarled oak tree like a hanging side of beef. Only it wasn't anything that simple, that normal. Chris stared upward, her eyes starting from her head. It was Chili, bloodied and wrapped in a smeared white sheet, harnessed under her dead arms by the dangling rope which swung her. Horrified, struck dumb with terror, Chris ran screaming back to the house, dashing headlong almost sightlessly, her brain and heart and soul pounding like dynamos gone wild. Chili, dead! She shot up the porch, through the front door, and slammed it shut behind her, as if her salvation depended on it. It did. She backed away from the closed door, seeing through it, seeing Chili swinging from the end of that rope. "Oh, God, Chili! No! Derek, help! Where are you?" A sudden gust of wind blew the front door open again, smashing it against the inner wall. Chris jumped. Pure instinct guided her. She bolted the door madly, seized the nearest chair, and barricaded the portal by forcing the chair under the doorknob. Breathlessly, she moved to the windows. She slammed the first one shut, then the second, then a third, locking each one as she did so. Her fingers were like frozen ice cubes. At the third window, one more horror awaited her. She very nearly went out of her mind right then and there. The wind behind her blew open another window with a sudden burst of crashing sound. She whirled like a top at the noise. Her nerves and reflexes and every atom of her being were geared to the slightest change in the nature of the room, the cottage. Derek came flying through the window, but not under his own power, no. Through the shattering glass, the splintering shards, his bloody corpse came, released like a juggernaut. It landed against her, knocking her over in a sprawl of arms and legs. His body was still warm. Together they hit the floor. In a mad frenzy, Chris tried to push his lifeless form away. "This can't be happening, no!" Her voice was a broken, stammering moan. "It can't be, it can't be!" But it was. The terror, the horror, the madness only mounted, multiplied, enlarged in a new paradigm of fantasy and hideous reality. Glass crashed again. Another window was breaking. Her dazed eyes saw the massive, ugly monster squeezing his immense frame through another broken window. It was Jason, urging his great form through the opening. His face was in the shadows, but his hand was in the light. The axe held there caught the fireplace's dying gleam. Chris backed off, her mouth working, her head shaking. This was real. This was the monster. "Oh, God, no!" Fear moved her. Paralyzing terror did not stop her limbs. She scrambled away from Derek's lifelessness and sprang for the spiral staircase. She gained the top of the stairs and the balcony in one incredible explosion of speed. Hysteria lent her wings. One look down the staircase and the hysteria turned to blood-chilling madness. Her sanity began to crumble, melt, dissolve. Jason was at the base of the stairs. Jason wearing that featureless white mask. He was brandishing the axe, gleaming as it caught the firelight. He began to ascend slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the universe to kill one defenseless female, the last one left alive in this charnel house of the dead. The mask was a slit-eyed cipher. One left to go. The girl responsible for it all. Jason came up the stairs, axe at the ready. His eyes were twin coals of burning insanity, shining through the slits. And purpose, deadly purpose, marked his blazing stare. Chris saw the bookcase resting against the balcony wall. It was huge, loaded with hard-covered tomes. She did not stop to think or ask herself if she had the strength. She did it. The adrenaline of fear drove her to superhuman endeavor. She had to use all her power and all her fear to shove the heavy bookcase forward, out from the wall, away from its position, sliding and shoving it to the head of the spiral staircase. Jason kept on coming, one step at a time, a masked monster. With a mighty shove and a gasp of torment, Chris sent the bookcase over the balcony, books and all toppling it directly into the path of the giant looming below her. So close she could have seen the mad color of his eyes had she wanted to look, mask or no mask. The bookcase fell heavily against the massive body of the man coming up the stairs. There was a grunt, a crash, and both man and bookcase went crashing down the staircase. A sob erupted from Chris's throat. Turning blindly, not waiting to see, she reeled down the hallway of the second level. The gloomy corridor was a maze in which her building terror and near insanity roamed desperately. There was no more sound from the base of the staircase below. Chris, her ears ringing with the furious thumping of her own heart, raced down the hallway looking for salvation and escape. But there seemed no place to hide, nowhere to run from the terror and horror that was down below. The monster was still loose in the house, and she was alone with Death. Death, who wore a white mask. Chapter 9. The Girl and the Ghoul. Cunning now replaced desperation. The will to live, the good fight for self-preservation guided Chris like a helping hand from some divine power. She could not wait to learn if the bookcase attack had been successful. There was no more time for guesswork, no room, no margin for error. Any mistake this time could well be her last, and death would be the end of everything. She nearly slipped on the running water streaming from the bathroom. That was when she thought of a diversionary tactic. She didn't wait to ponder the wisdom of the move. She slammed the bathroom door and the bedroom door as loudly as she could, and then rapidly disappeared into the closet at the end of the dark hall. She locked herself in, breathing hard. Her heart was a painful lump in her chest. It was beating so violently. She huddled in the narrow, cramped darkness, squeezed between all kinds of hanging clothes and paraphernalia. She waited, listening, hardly daring to breathe, straining to catch some indication that the monster, the ghoul, was prowling about looking for her. Unless the bookcase. A faint glimmer of hope burned in her breast. She heard nothing. The hallway was alarmingly quiet. Dead quiet. She covered her mouth to stifle the sound of her panicky breathing. Tears, unbidden, came down her flushed and fiery cheeks. Her head was filled with all sorts of terrible pictures. Chilly, Derek, their bloody bodies, the others. Where were they? She slowly leaned forward and peered out the keyhole. The corridor was so dark, so silent, and so empty. She pressed her eye closer, gasping for breath. Suddenly there came a noise directly above her. It was a night of noises and terror, and more insanity. Debbie's mutilated corpse was falling on top of her from the shelf of the closet. She screamed. She couldn't stop the scream. She was out of control now. But even as she winced and her heart lurched at the sight of Debbie's dead face, she clapped a hand over her own mouth in sheer reflex. Too late. Underneath the weight of her dead friend's body, she trembled with terror. The night was madness. This was all so unthinkable, yet it was true. Good God, what did it all mean? She pushed forward again, freeing herself of the bloody corpse, and put her eye to the keyhole once more. She could have died on the spot. The nightmare, the monster, the ghoul had returned. Jason was coming down the hall, weird mask and all, toward her, toward the keyhole. He was a raging mad bull, unleashed. The axe was held aloft, ready to maim and smash and kill. Chris shrank from the sight, backing up against the closet wall, praying the door would hold, that she wouldn't be discovered, that she wouldn't be butchered, that she wouldn't die. She held in the screams that wanted to come, to burst from her. She was not going to be her own executioner. But it was no use. There was no pity, no salvation. The shining axe began to slice through the wooden closet door. The first slice was like a pistol shot in the stillness, ripping and tearing. Chris's body stiffened. Her trembling face was almost in line with the axe blade, as the monster on the other side of the door drew back the axe and sliced downward and inward again. Wood splinters flew. The carving knife that was jutting out of Debbie's dead neck suddenly caught Chris's eye. She flinched, but she reached and pulled the bloody knife out. She closed her hand around the shaft, her own eyes not quite sane. In a frenzy, Jason was pounding the axe into the closet door again and again. The splintering holes now permitted an area large enough for him to reach a long arm in and find the inside knob. He did just that, getting the door open before Chris could stop him. Triumphantly, a hoarse sound erupting in his throat, he loomed in the entranceway. The axe coming up once more for the killing downward slice. He took a step inward, his eyes searching the darkness for his final victim. Chris, who reacted instantly to the mammoth threat so close. She stabbed out wildly with the carving knife. She punctured the reaching hand, the one with the axe. The axe dropped to the floor. Jason staggered backward to escape further injury. Maddened, terrified, Chris came at him in a fury, heaving, grunting, lunging at him repeatedly, slicing the air in front of his brutal face. Now the massive arm retreated. The girl bravely followed, made stronger by adversity. Jason stepped backward to avoid both her and the carving knife. The move was ill-timed. The water from the bathroom caused his foot to slide out from under him. Chris saw the opening and took it. She thrust the knife downward, and her elation soared as she felt it dig into the giant's thigh, striking bone and flesh. Jason howled in agony and tumbled to the wet floor, the knife still embedded in his thigh. Chris had been unable to hang on to it, but the damage was done. Score one for terrified young ladies pursued by mad monsters. Yet the path to freedom was still blocked by the downed brute's body. He was shielding Chris's access to the spiral staircase. For a moment she panicked. Then she flung herself at Shelley's bedroom. It seemed the only way out. It wasn't. The door was still closed. Chris bashed her full weight against the panel, but it would not give. Behind her she heard Jason's fierce grunt. She heard rather than saw him pluck the knife from his wounded thigh. He was hobbling to his feet, favoring that leg. Chris hurled herself at the door once more. She got the door open just in time. The carving knife flung by the angered Jason whizzed by her head and thudded into the wall behind her. She escaped into Shelley's room, with death but an inch from her shoulder. The air was electric with danger. She dashed for the bedroom window, driven by sheer terror. She grabbed a chair as she went, smashing it through the pane in desperation. Quickly she hoisted herself, ignoring the shards jutting dangerously, squeezing out through the broken window. Lowering herself out the window, hands clinging to the sill, she looked down at the ground, an unnerving distance for her. She took one last deep breath and relinquished her hold, and prayed. But Jason had apparently been right on her heels. Her descent was checked, magically, as if a giant hand had stopped her. It had, and he had. Jason's mammoth paw, reaching down through the broken window, arrested her fall, catching the collar of the jacket about her neck. She was dangling now in his powerful grasp, 2 full floors above the hard earth below, hanging like chili. He began to haul her back up and in with great ease. She resisted with all the strength she had left, twisting, flailing her arms, screaming. The massive ghoul chuckled, drawing her upward. His masked face was weirdly close and terrible. Chris ripped open the jacket with both desperate hands and began to wriggle free of the garment. Jason pulled savagely. He almost had her now. In another second, the prey would be his. And then she was free of the jacket, falling, plummeting, plunging all the way to the ground. The monster above her ripped out a fierce oath of disappointment as he fell backwards. Her weight released, the empty garment clutched in his brute hands. She lay on the ground for a long moment, stunned, out of breath, her ankles pounding with agony from the force of the fall. But she forced herself erect, hobbled past the cellar, hunching low as she snaked her way to the front entrance of the house, the porch. Half out of her mind now, she looked up into the living room through the open door. The danger was still with her. The menace had not gone away. Horror was coming again on those awesome feet. She could see the monster coming down the spiral staircase, past the toppled, smashed bookcase. He was hobbling too, but he was still coming to kill her. She saw no chance to escape now, not with her ankles so bruised and hurting. Shaking, sobbing, with a great deal of pain shooting up her legs, she picked up a heavy log from the stacked pile near the entrance and waited. She leaned against the wall of the house, raising the log high above her head, lying in wait for Jason. There was no other ploy, no other trick left to her. This was it, the last stand, Judgment Day, the final out. He came hobbling out of the house into the night, searching, his great body a massive menace, a ghoul. Chris sprang forward with all she had, her ultimate gesture. She brought the upraised log down with all her weight behind it, and her fear, and her anger. She caught him directly behind the back of the head. The thud was like the end of the world. The blow sent him spinning, reeling, dancing off the porch in a senseless sprawl, flipping him down face first on the rocky terrain that fronted the house. He rolled over, briefly, and then was still, as if he had finally died and come to his proper end. Chris did not wait to see or find out. She scampered from the porch, bells ringing in her ears, cannons going off in her chest. Bad legs or not, she ran with the howling wind tearing at her face and hair. Her soul soared. She ran from the porch over to the van, still parked diagonally across from the house. The van that Ali had taken all the gasoline from. A van that would not, could not go anywhere, least of all to freedom, to safety, and escape from horror. The wind still howled and tore at her as she ran. But death yet walked at Crystal Lake in Pinehurst County. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 8 and 9 of Friday the 13th, Part 3, 3D, by Michael Avallone. Hope you guys have been enjoying this book so far. I have to agree with Sean Campbell on this one, though. It's kind of just a little bit bland. I mean, it's just pretty much a direct novelization of the movie, where, you know, some of the other novelizations we've done, the writers have gone more depth into the characters and their backstories and added a few things here and there. But this book, other than its few differences, you know, Loco was white in the movie. I don't think Derek's name was Derek in the movie. Jason had a hockey mask in the movie and not a white featureless mask. Other than those differences, everything else is lining up perfectly with the movie. Now, I do want to ask, if any of you have read the Simon Hawke version, which I will be narrating on the channel later, I have not read it yet, does that one go into more detail on a few things, or is it pretty much exactly the same as this one? Either way, I will still narrate it, that way both versions are available here on the channel. But I'm just curious, so anybody who's listening, if you've read the Simon Hawke version, please let me know if it at least tries to, you know, add a little bit to the book from the movie. But, yeah, other than that, tonight's narration, I really enjoyed what I read. The chapters were good. The action was fast-paced. The guy likes to say terror and horror a lot. But other than that, you know, other than this guy constantly trying to build up the atmosphere with the same words, it was pretty intense. I enjoyed it. I'm not hating this book. And I'll be back with the conclusion very soon. As always, tonight's upload was brought to you by our patrons on the Patreon page: Carl Eakins, Catherine McClear, Sean Campbell, Cecilia Spears, and Hawaii. If you would like to support the channel, click the Patreon link in the description below. You can sign up for as low as $2 to $5 per month, get some great rewards for doing so depending on your tier, and all tiers come with early access to great slasher audiobook content, such as right now, Halloween 3, the novelization, and the next exclusive early access book will be Friday the 13th, Part 1 by Simon Hawke. Till next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and don't click that thumbs down button, because
it's got a death curse!
There's a love